The night it happened, Elise Bouchard had already been on her feet for 11 hours. She hadn't eaten since 6 that morning. A granola bar she'd chewed, standing up between patient rooms, and the only reason she was still moving was the particular kind of stubbornness that comes from loving your work more than your body will ever allow. 12 years of nursing did that to a person. 12 years of 12-hour shifts and fluorescent lights and watching people at their worst and their most fragile. It made you either hard or deeply, quietly tender, and Elise had somehow managed to become both at once. She was 31 years old. She stood 5'4" in her clogs. She kept her dark hair pinned back in the same low bun she'd worn since nursing school because loose hair was a hazard, and she didn't have time to think about her hair. She drove a 10-year-old Civic that made a sound like a dying kettle when the heat kicked in. She sent money home to her mother in Moncton every second month without being asked. She had not taken a vacation in 3 years. None of that was visible when she walked into Charpentier's on that Thursday evening in late January. What was visible was the scrubs, the worn soft navy scrubs she hadn't had time to change out of, the hospital ID still clipped to her chest, the shadows under her eyes that no amount of sleep ever fully fixed anymore, and the slight uncertain way she pushed through the door of one of downtown Ottawa's more quietly expensive restaurants, already knowing, somewhere low in her stomach, that she might not belong there. She wasn't there for herself. She was there to meet her sister. Claudine had called 3 days earlier, voice tight and bright in the way it got when she was pretending things were fine. She'd moved back from Vancouver 4 months ago with barely any explanation, was staying in a sublet in Century Town, and had asked Elise to dinner with a formality that felt fragile, like something that might crack if you pressed it. Elise had said yes immediately. She'd rearranged her whole week to say yes. Charpentier's was Claudine's choice. It was that kind of place. Dark wood, low lighting, cloth napkins folded into elaborate shapes that Elise was afraid to unfold. The kind of place where the menu didn't list prices on the version they handed to certain people. Elise had looked it up online and quietly rearranged her budget for the month. The host at the front. Young, polished, a suit that probably cost more than Elise's car payment, looked at her with a particular expression that isn't technically a sneer, but functions as one. His eyes moved from her face to her ID badge to her shoes, and something in his posture shifted. A closing off. A reassessment. "Do you have a reservation?" he said. The way he said it made the question mean something else. "Bouchard," she said. "My sister may have booked it under Claudine Bouchard." He looked at the screen. Looked back at her. "The rest of your party hasn't arrived." "That's fine," she said. "I'll wait at the table." A pause. "We prefer guests wait at the bar until their full party is present." Elise looked toward the bar, which was already crowded, and then back at the tables, several of which were clearly empty and set. She thought about the 11 hours. She thought about the 11 hours. She thought about the granola bar. "I don't mind waiting at the table," she said, keeping her voice even. "I've had a long shift." "I understand," he said, in a tone that communicated he did not. "But those are our policies." She went to the bar. She found a narrow space at the end and stood because there were no stools free, and she ordered a sparkling water because she didn't drink on an empty stomach. And she checked her phone and saw that Claudine was running 20 minutes late because of a streetcar delay, and she breathed through it. She was good at breathing through things. That was when the couple arrived. They came in just behind her. A man and a woman, mid-50s, dressed in the careful, understated way of people who had money and had had it long enough not to need to announce it. The man had the thick silver hair of a certain kind of Ottawa professional. The woman wore a coat that Elise recognized, distantly, as the kind that came in a bag with a ribbon. The host, the same one, lit up. Not extravagantly, just enough. His whole posture reorganized itself into something warmer, more attentive. He came out from behind the stand. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth," he said. "Your table is ready." They were seated immediately. The good table near the window, the one Elise had walked past and instinctively categorized as the kind you got if you were the kind of person who always got that table. She told herself it was fine. She told herself these things happened. She'd been in the profession long enough to know that the world made its small, constant calculations about who deserved comfort and who didn't, and she'd learned to let most of those calculations slide off her like water. But then the woman, Mrs. Ashworth, turned and looked at Elise. really looked at her, and said, clearly enough to be heard by the two men sitting closest to them, they really should have a separate entrance for hospital staff, or at least require them to change before coming to places like this. The bar went briefly quieter, the way spaces do when something unkind has been said out loud. Elise felt the heat rise up from her chest to her throat. She kept her eyes on the glass of sparkling water in front of her. She thought, I have held the hands of dying people. I have worked through a pandemic without a single sick day. I have not cried at work since 2019, and I am not going to start now in a restaurant. She didn't say anything. Mrs. Ashworth, perhaps mistaking silence for invitation, continued. I suppose one can't expect much, can one? They do let anyone in these days. One of the men beside Elise snorted softly. The bartender found something to do at the far end of the bar. The host had disappeared back behind his stand. Elise set down her water glass very carefully. She was trying to decide the way you do in those moments, the rapid, exhausted calculation of whether to speak and what the cost will be. When the restaurant door opened again, she heard it more than saw it. The particular shift in air pressure, the sound of a large dog's nails on the hardwood floor, steady and deliberate, like a metronome. Then a man's voice, unhurried, speaking to someone at the door, she's with me. She goes where I go. Elise turned. She knew that voice the way she knew the sound of the hospital at 3 a.m. Not consciously, not with thought, but somewhere deeper and more permanent than thought. Captain Remy Thibault stood in the doorway of Charpentiers in civilian clothes, dark trousers, a charcoal sweater, the same close-cropped dark hair she'd known for 6 years. Beside him, on a short working lead, was Kodiak, 75 pounds of Belgian Malinois, dark-masked, amber-eyed, with the particular stillness of a working dog in a new environment, alert to everything, reacting to nothing. She wore a green vest that said, Survey in Nymel, do not pet, and she moved with Remy the way water moves downhill, without effort, without question. Elise had not told him to come. She had texted him 2 hours ago, a nothing text, the kind you send when you're tired and you want contact without conversation. Long shift. Dinner with Claudine tonight, that fancy place she picked. Wish me luck. She hadn't expected a response for hours. He was often in areas with limited signal. He had driven 40 minutes from Petawawa. He crossed the room to her, and she watched him read the situation in about 4 seconds, the way he always could, the way years of CANSO-FCOM operations had made him fluent in a language that had nothing to do with words. His eyes moved from her face to the Ashworth's table, to the host's stand, and back to her face, and something in his expression settled. Hey, he said. He touched her shoulder briefly, the way you do with someone you know the whole history of. Claudine running late, streetcar, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Right. He turned and looked at the bartender, who had returned from his urgent business at the far end. Can we get a table for 3? Bouchard reservation. The bartender looked at the host. The host appeared from behind his stand, took in Remy, the height, the bearing, the dog, and underwent a visible internal revision. Of course, he said. Right away. They were taken to a table, not the window table. Elise noticed this, catalogued it, let it go, but a good table near enough to the room to feel like part of it. Kodiak settled at Remy's feet. She was trained to do this, to become, in public spaces, as unobtrusive as a shadow. Only her eyes moved, sweeping the room in slow, methodical arcs. Remy had rescued her from a military working dog program 3 years ago, when a training injury had ended her formal service, and she had transferred her considerable focus entirely to him. She went everywhere he went. She had a jacket for 30 weather, and she had opinions about which of his friends were trustworthy, and she had once, very calmly, placed herself between Remy and a man outside a gas station in Pembroke who had decided he wanted to be aggressive, and the man had reconsidered. Mrs. Ashworth, Elise noticed, had turned back to her window table. The silver-haired man was showing his companion something on his phone. The host had disappeared again. For a few minutes, they just sat there, she and Remy and Kodiak, in the particular companionable quiet of people who have been through things together and don't need to fill every silence. You drove from Petawawa, she said. I was already in Almonte, he said. Don't make it something. Almonte is not Ottawa. It's closer than Petawawa. She looked at him. He was looking at the menu with the careful attention of someone who is definitely not looking at her, but is absolutely aware of exactly what she's thinking. She said we should have a separate entrance, Elise said. Hospital staff. Remy set down the menu. He didn't look toward the Ashworth's table. His voice was quiet and completely level. I heard. I almost said something. I know. I'm glad I didn't. Yeah, he said. Me too. There was a pause. Kodiak's tail moved once, slowly, against the floor. Is Kodiak allowed in here? Elise asked. Legally, in Ontario and federally, service animals are permitted in any establishment open to the public. He picked up the menu again. I looked it up in the car. She laughed. Genuinely, the first time in about 11 hours that something had moved through her that wasn't exhaustion or the particular hollowness that follows being humiliated in a quiet room. Claudine arrived 22 minutes later, still apologizing as she came through the door, her coat half-buttoned, her cheeks red from the cold. She was 34, taller than Elise, and she had their mother's way of entering rooms, occupying them fully, without meaning to. She stopped when she saw Remy. You came, she said. She texted, he said. Claudine looked at her sister. Elise made a small face that meant don't, and Claudine pressed her lips together and sat down and ordered a glass of wine and said, Okay, tell me everything. And Elise did. She told it without drama. She told it the way she told most things, flatly, in sequence, with the details that mattered and without the ones that didn't. The host and his assessment. The bar and the standing. The woman in her coat and her very clear opinion about what kind of people belonged where. Claudine's jaw tightened incrementally with each sentence. What did you do? She asked. I sat there, Elise said. Remy drove from Almonte, Elise said. Remy drove from Almont, Elise said. Claudine looked at him with an expression that was partly gratitude and partly something sadder and more complicated. She'd known Remy since he and Elise had met at a trauma conference in Halifax 6 years ago. Elise presenting a paper on ICU patient communication, Remy there as part of a Canso Calm wellness consultation, both of them somehow ending up at the same terrible buffet table at the same time, arguing about whether pineapple had any business in a savory dish. He said yes. She still believed he was wrong. He was not her boyfriend. He was not her partner in any way that had a clean label. He was simply the person who showed up. Reliably, quietly, without being asked. Someone should say something to the management, Claudine said. It's fine, Elise said. It's not fine. You've been a nurse for 12 years. You worked through COVID. You worked through COVID. You worked through the staffing crisis. You've kept people alive who should not have survived. And you stood at a bar in your scrubs after an 11-hour shift because some host decided you didn't look like their clientele. And then some woman decided to comment on it out loud, in public, within earshot of other people. Claudine, I'm going to speak to the manager. You're not going to speak to the manager. Watch me. Claudine. Elise's voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it. The edge she used with patients who were about to pull out their own IV lines. I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't want tonight to be about that. I want tonight to be about you telling me why you actually came back from Vancouver. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Softer. More complicated. Claudine looked at her wine glass. That's a different conversation. It's the only conversation I came here for, Elise said. The rest of it, she gestured vaguely toward the Ashworth's table, the bar, the whole accumulation of the evening's smaller indignities. That's just noise. I've worked in a hospital for 12 years. I know the difference between noise and what actually matters. Remy was looking at the menu again. Kodiak had shifted positions slightly, her chin now resting on Remy's boot. The candle on the table had burned down a centimeter. Claudine took a breath and said, I left because Mark and I separated. And then I didn't come back because I didn't know how to tell you that I'd been lying about how fine everything was for the better part of a year. The table was quiet. Elise reached over and put her hand over her sister's. You should have called me, she said. I know. Months ago, I know. I would have come. That's why I didn't call, Claudine said. You would have dropped everything and come, and you already drop everything for everyone, all the time, and I didn't want to be another thing you were carrying. Elise opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her sister's face. The tiredness in it, the old careful pride that had always made Claudine seem more self-sufficient than she actually was, and recognized it with a particular clarity. She'd seen it in hospital rooms, the look of someone who has been strong for so long they've forgotten they're allowed to ask for help. That is, she said finally, the most ridiculous thing you have ever said. And you once told a border guard we were transporting a musical instrument when we had a cat in a violin case. Claudine laughed. The tension in her shoulders broke open and she laughed. The real kind. The kind that sounds a little like crying if you listen closely. Remy looked up from the menu. I'm not going to ask about the cat, he said. Good, both of them said at the same time. They ordered. The food was very good. Elise would admit this later with some reluctance because it felt like conceding something to the evening. The bread came with actual butter in a small dish. There was a soup that tasted like something a person who loved cooking had made for someone they cared about. Claudine ate everything on her plate, which Elise noted privately and with relief. At the table by the window, the Ashworths finished their meal and left without looking toward them. The host said something pleasant as they departed. The door swung shut behind them. At some point, Elise couldn't say exactly when, the bartender appeared at their table. Not the one from earlier, but a younger woman who'd taken over the service, with the kind of face that is naturally warm without performing it. I just wanted to say, she said, looking at Elise, and then at the ID still clipped to her chest. I'm an RPN. I graduated last spring. Haven't done my first real shift yet. I'm still waiting on a placement, but… She paused. I wanted to say thank you. For still going in. After everything the last few years. I heard what that woman said earlier. At the bar. And I just wanted you to know that I thought it was awful. And I think what nurses do is… She stopped. Started again. I think it matters. I know that doesn't fix anything. Elise looked at her for a moment. The woman was young, 22, maybe 23, with the particular open-faced earnestness that Elise remembered from her own first year in nursing, before the hours and the losses had rearranged some of her features into something more guarded. What's your name? She asked. Simone, she said. Simone, you're going to be excellent, Elise said. I mean that. The ones who already understand what it matters before they start. They're the ones who make it. Simone smiled and went back behind the bar and didn't hover over them the rest of the night, which was exactly the right instinct. Later, dessert uneaten, coffee finished, Claudine's coat back on. They stood outside on the January sidewalk under a sky that was clear and entirely indifferent to what had happened inside. Elise could see her breath. A streetcar went past, nearly empty at this hour, its lights orange in the dark. Claudine hugged her. The real kind of hug, held long enough to mean something. Come over Saturday, Elise said. I'll make the lentil soup. You don't have to. I want to. Come over Saturday. Bring nothing. Just come. Claudine said okay. She said it quietly, like something she'd been needing permission to say for longer than either of them had realized. She took a cab east. Elise and Remy stood on the sidewalk. Kodiak sat between them and watched the street with the serene professional attention of someone who took their responsibilities seriously. Thank you for coming, Elise said. I was in Almonte, Remy said. You keep saying that because it's important context. She looked at him, his profile in the cold air, the visible haze of his breath. She had known this person for 6 years. She knew the way he laughed at things he found genuinely funny, which was different from the polite laugh he used in group settings. She knew he drank his coffee without sugar and slept badly on nights before anything consequential, and had read the same novel 4 times because he'd told her it was the only one that had ever made him feel less alone, and he hadn't told anyone else that. She knew that he had driven from Almonte tonight because she'd sent a text that didn't ask him to, and that he would never make her feel the weight of that, and that this was the rarest possible quality in a person. She was wrong, he said. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching a car that had slowed at the corner and was now moving on. That woman. In there. I know, Elise said. Not just wrong about scrubs in a restaurant. Wrong in the way that she looked at you and decided what you were worth before you'd said a single word. And she was so wrong, it almost doesn't merit a response. Except, he paused. Except it does. It matters. Because you were standing at that bar for 20 minutes on your own after 11 hours and nobody. Remy, I'm nearly done. She waited. Remy, I'm nearly done. She waited. You are. He said it carefully, the way he said things he meant without wanting them to sound like speeches. You are someone who holds people together at the worst moments of their lives. You do it quietly, without recognition. You do it when you're this tired and you don't complain about any of it. And I just think people should know that when they look at you. I think it should be visible somehow, that you're one of the people keeping things from falling apart. The street was quiet. Somewhere east of them, a bus turned a corner. Elise said, I'm going to say something sentimental, and I need you to not be weird about it. Okay, you are a very good person, Remy Thibault. That's not that sentimental. I'm tired, she said. I'm working with a deficit. He smiled. It was the real one. The one she'd gotten used to cataloging over 6 years as something worth watching for. Kodiak stood up, stretched her front legs out in the unhurried way of working dogs between assignments, and looked up at both of them with the faintly judicious expression that Elise had come to think of as her "are we going now" face. She wants to go, Remy said. I know. Elise crouched down and put her hand briefly on Kodiak's dark head. The dog leaned into it just slightly. Good girl, she said, quietly. Good girl. She straightened. She took a breath of the cold Ottawa air, the kind that clears everything out and makes the city feel briefly, improbably clean. She was 31 years old. She had 11 patients tomorrow morning. She drove a car that made a sound like a dying kettle when the heat kicked in. And she was going to go home and sleep harder than she had in weeks. And on Saturday, she was going to make lentil soup for her sister, and somewhere in the conversation that would follow, Claudine would start, very slowly, to let herself be helped. The woman with the coat and the careful opinion about who deserved to take up space would go home tonight and never think about it again. Elise walked to her car with Remy and Kodiak and did not think about the woman at all.